Yeah, we've been having some internet issues at City Hall lately, but should be good to go. Everyone except Adrian is here. She actually had told me she's traveling the country, so she won't make it. So yeah, I think we can go ahead and get started. Um, I can just share the agenda really quickly. Can you guys all see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. I'm not sure if we have to approve the minutes. Kathy, do you know?
I think we do. I think we do.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. So these are the minutes for the last meeting. It was just going over, we just had the presentation since we didn't have a quorum. So
oh, no, that's a different question, whether it was an official meeting or not. Forgot that. I see Abby's on. She might be a better person to ask about that than if it's what wasn't a real quorum. So
hey,
I got it fixed. Sorry about
okay,
that.
cool. We actually have a question for you. Do we need to approve these meeting minutes since the last time we had a meeting, we actually didn't have a quorum?
Okay, so those are just notes, and I would say no.
yeah.
Okay, great. Then we can probably just move right along into our draft plan. So Paul, do you want to go ahead and take it away?
Sure, absolutely. Hey, thanks everybody again for taking the time to meet today. It's been a little while since we had the opportunity to connect. I think those meeting minutes were from October. We had some different points in between as we developed at that October meeting. We had the community engagement results in which we shared kind of to understand some of the key concepts and themes that we would be talking through. And then since that time, we had posted the University Avenue. Basically, it's the 4 buckets or key themes that emerged as part of this in the visioning document. So that was posted onto the website around the December timeframe. We paused here as everyone got through the holidays. The SRF team continued to work through, and proud today to say that we have a draft plan in place to share with you. Was completed at the part of like last week, and again, just wanted to kind of take today's meeting to bring us back together, provide an overview of the contents of that plan. We wanted to present the high-level recommendations that we came to, and give you some of the reasons why those are the recommendations that we are thinking that would be best appropriate for this plan. Have an open discussion with you. I think one of the things we want to take away is a whole lot less presenting and a whole lot of input from you, and then discuss the next steps as we move forward in the process. So Daphne, are you sharing the screen with the plan? Do you want me to share that?
Yeah, up to you. I can pull it up real quick.
I'll share it if you're okay with that.
Okay, yeah.
That way I can kind of navigate to the places that we need to be for what I was going to present here. So can you all see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I just want to jump to kind of our initial project schedule that's laid out in the plan itself. And I'm sorry for hitting the wrong buttons there. Essentially, I just want to start with the overall schedule. So as this group met and talked in July, we developed through that online community survey right before the Good Neighbor Festival. Got 399 pieces of input, surveys that were compiled and completed as part of the that time over the community survey and festival. Again, we presented about a month later in October the results of those findings. At that point, we developed the vision and developed some of the one-page documents that we're kind of building this report on, and I'll touch on that here in a little bit. Here we are today with the ad hoc meeting number 3. And what the point of today, again, is to go through the draft document, these dates, kind of building the schedule forward. Based on the feedback we get today, we go back and make some changes and finalize the documentation to the appropriate level. We will then want to advertise and push this out for community input. And I can discuss that in just a minute as well. The time frame of that open house and community engagement will then lead us into the Plan Commission presentation and Common Council presentation. I think just kind of working backwards here, we're sitting at February 3rd. There's some time built into the schedule, both for the open house and the Plan Commission presentation, with the commission meeting every 2 weeks. But I think, you know, with spring breaks and things of that nature coming on in the month of March and elections in early April, I think our target date for delivery and adoption by the council would be March 15th. So there's a lot of activity to kind of go over here in the next 6 weeks. So with that, I'll pause and just kind of stop there and see if anybody has any input or questions. Okay. And then one thing I want to bring up, and I guess right now would be an appropriate time, working with Daphne through this and saying, like, what's the best, you know, plan moving forward with open houses. And it sounds like the presentation the commission and the Common Council isn't meeting right now in person, as far as I understand. And so, you know, probably not the best time for an in-person open house, given the health pandemic that we're in. And so we had strategized some ideas here and to try to collect meaningful public engagement in an arena that, you know, doesn't allow, you know, a specific day and time, but rather opens it up for discussion over, say, a 2-week to 3-week period in which people can be directed to the site, have some time to dive in and read through the plan. Through that process, Daphne and I have both acknowledged the openness to meet with whomever wants to meet and collect comments that way if we feel that that is an appropriate way to do it. I guess the plan, if we were to choose this, and I can get into this in a little bit more detail in a little bit later, but just to give you an idea, would be I would record maybe a 3-minute presentation where somebody can go on the website and watch what we did, where we were, what we've developed, how they can provide input, and the schedule. Simple, quick hitting, put together a presentation like that. And then also have documents and access to it, like this document that you'll see today in its completed form. And then allow it open for, you know, a period of time, whether that be 14, 21 days, whatever the group feels is appropriate, to collect comments. And then kind of take those through a comment form or emails or phone calls that way to incorporate public thoughts. So again, how does that sound to you guys?
Good.
How will people know? How will you let them know that there's this page out there? What I'm would like to know is the businesses on the corridor. Those guys should all know what we're thinking about here. So what is the best way to let everybody on that avenue know what's going on and get their input if possible?
Yeah, and I'll turn it over to Daphne to answer some of the ways in which the city might do some of the outreach and posting some of the materials. But yeah, I think that those are two things that we would push out right away, Jeff, is to kind of say, all right, this document is available. We get that out to the listserv or to, you know, the group that way. Count on and posting it on websites, things like that. Social media is another possibility. What else, Daphne and Abby? Maybe you guys could comment on that.
Yeah, I think if we want to target specifically, like obviously University Avenue, what we can do is we can send out like a mailer just along, you know, all the businesses and, you know, properties along that street. And with just, you know, like maybe even just a postcard saying like, here's the website, here's where you can access, you know, the open house video, the, you know, the draft plan on this website. And, you know, we have the simple like University Ave plan website up on our city website. So that can just be something simple for them to go in and access it.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Will there be ways for people to leave comments on the website also?
Yeah, go ahead, Daphne.
Yeah, that's something we can look into. I can ask Drew, if there's like a widget or something on our website that he can send it in, or, just simple like leave my email, Paul's email at the bottom,
well,
and they can email
Yeah,
it.
I know if we do like a Facebook or Nextdoor stuff, people can drop in comments and stuff too, but if we're directing them to this presentation, I think it'd be to have more of the comments together, that might be a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Katie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Paul. I would like to volunteer as well. To take, if I love the postcard idea, I think it's really excellent. If there could be extras printed that I could take to the individuals who live on and the businesses that are on University Avenue in my district, I'd love to kind of do a redundant check-in. Here's the postcard. You probably already got it in the mail, but I wanted to make sure that you got it, and kind of something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be great.
I love that idea, Katie, because I think it takes people hearing it a few times before it clicks and they can attend. I am a little bit concerned about the schedule because I don't think we would have anywhere near enough time to give people advance notice and let them know. I do think that having the YouTube video, or however we're going to link it out, I love that idea. I mean, if we're deciding we're not going to do a Zoom live option, I think having the video and linking it out and accepting comments online somewhere would be an okay substitute.
Abby, what are you feeling about the numbers, the COVID numbers? We're seeing a drop. I mean, do you feel like if we did an open house slightly later, we could literally do it in person and still offer the YouTube if people didn't feel comfortable?
I would think so. The direction that we have right now from city administration is that our employees aren't supposed to be meeting with anyone in person, but I think that it's kind of still a lagging effect of that really bad spike that we saw with Omicron, where we had a lot of employees that were out sick or quarantining. And that seems to have waned a lot. And even through like the schools, I'm not getting daily emails anymore about close contacts with my kids. So it seems like there might be a window here coming up in the next month or so where we might be able to do an in-person if we can get approval through city administration.
Yeah, and Randy, I see your hand up. I'll get to you here in just a second. I just wanted to respond to that too. And Daphne, I brought that up to Daphne in one of our calls too. It's like, I want to be respectful of the project schedule, but I also understand that maybe we're turning a corner here. And if we think the best situation might be to just get the draft, get the report, into a really good spot, so this committee and the staff had a chance to, really feel good about it. Honestly, that could probably sit for any amount of time before going back out to the comment of the residents. So if we feel like, hey, you know what, in 6 weeks, Dane County's mask mandate might lift and we think we're good, that's an option that I brought on the table too. But I just wanted to be respectful of the schedule and of your times as committee members, and just provide a menu of options, if you will, to that. So yeah, I guess the big thing to work through is first getting this document where we're all happy and feeling really good about the content and the recommendations that are developed from it.
Yeah.
And then that gives us a better understanding of like, oh, how much work do we really have to do yet to get it in tip-top shape? Or are we really close and it's just kind of waiting for the environment to change around us to be able to meet in person?
Paul, do you think it's important to have the open house before the Common Council presentation? Is that pushing our, I mean, do we push the Common Council thing as well if we try for an open house? Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, so
Thanks.
on this schedule here, this meeting today, kind of, I think it lends itself in the way that it shapes up here. I think the open house would be the opportunity to collect all those comments for the ad hoc committee to feel really good about where we're at, to incorporate those, put that document back in front of you. And then I think, and Abby and Daphne, correct me if I'm wrong, is this something that's going through adoption, or is it just, yeah. So, and obviously we'd have a recommendation and then an adoption in those two meetings at the end. And then I think it was Randy, I think you had a comment maybe?
Yeah, I think maybe it's been covered. I wanted to find out kind of what the steps were after the council presentation, and if in fact that there would be an adoption of the plan, which I would hope to occur.
Yeah, so the plan is at the plan commission presentation, they would give a recommendation to common council to adopt it. And then at the common council presentation, they would present it, and then afterwards, our hope is that council would adopt it at that meeting.
Is the plan commission a public hearing?
I'm not sure, Abby, do we need a public hearing for that?
Well, I think we probably would want to have one before the plan commission. And if we decide that we want to incorporate this as part of the city's comprehensive plan, we would be required to have 2 public hearings, I think, and give a 30-day notice. I don't know if that's something, it might be something we could talk about with staff offline about whether we would want to look at a scenario where we would have the council approve the university plan, but then wait until we have some other modifications to the comp plan and then wrap it in at that time. Because there is some pretty strict requirements when you're amending your comp plan.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I appreciate you bringing that up, Abby. That it's probably a good idea. And then it's the other option would be, yeah, you host your plan commission public hearing and then you wait for your common council adoption process, but there's a whole bunch of red tape to walk through there potentially, so any other overarching comments of just kind of what I presented thus far? I do want to get into kind of just an overview of the document and give a little bit more background and explanation on why we took it to the levels we took it to, and maybe if there's something in there that you thought should be in there that isn't, we have that discussion and make sure we're kind of using this time effectively. But anything else before I kind of just give a brief overview of the document?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. I think that if we did the communication where you did your video and we put it out to everybody, here's the link, I'll make some comments, but also on that communication, if we could announce when there was an open house and how, if it's a Zoom or put the information on it at that time, we wouldn't be looking for ways to get the information out and people would have a chance to review it ahead of time. And also with the council presentation, we do actually have until the second meeting in April before the new council. We actually have a meeting the third week in April with the current council. So
that is good to know. And I think what we can do here is, these are great conversations. Keep these all at the front and the back of your mind here, because I think once we again look at the document and we get a thumbs up, thumbs sideways, or a thumbs down on what we've developed at this point, we'll be able to put together a path forward and some understanding of like time to deliver that we can kind of mesh into our schedule moving forward. And I guess right off the front is, Kathy and Katie as members of the council, and Abby and Daphne as members of the staff, are we tied into any sort of things on schedules, dates, needs to adopt? It sounds to me like Kathy and Katie might want to be that, kind of that drop dead date might be the end of April. But let me know if there's.
I don't know. I'd rather hear from Abby and Daphne. What do they think about it?
Yeah,
And
just looking at the document, and I like the sections where you're giving some specific recommendations for things like crossing improvements. And I was just thinking about how we would use that. We would, it could be like the blueprint for what we would be requesting in the budget for improvements.
Exactly.
And so For sure, I think we would want it by the end of June, because we start our budget process in July. Just since I'm already talking about this, I don't know if this goes beyond the scope of work. And so I didn't go back and review the scope with regard to this comment, but I was wondering if you could actually give us some rough cost estimates instead of just knowing the dollar sign, because
Yeah.
you know, we always struggle with you know, with our capital budget, unless we know just roughly what to request. We would have to go out and probably get a consultant to tell us eventually. So I was just wondering if that goes beyond the scope of work, or if that's something you could include.
We definitely can. In fact, the first draft that we gave to Daphne was very specific as far as like those crossing improvements. What does it cost for our RRFP at a crosswalk, and you know, things to that nature. There are some elements that are needing further study, right? So if we kind of go and say you need a multi-use path, that's like years away, right? Because you have to go through studies and surveys and preliminary design and things to that nature. And we want to get the pulse of making sure that's what you want to put into the plan as well. So to answer your question, Abby, we can get very specific on improvements like crossing improvements and things at intersections to the level that you want to show. I mean, obviously those
Yeah.
are subject to daily rates and, you know, concrete costs and a couple ranges of things, but yeah, we could provide those.
I think that would be great.
Or we could
And for
we
those
could-
more
oh,
complicated items, you know, keeping the dollar sign, the $3 signs, you know, if there's just no way because there's going to be land acquisition requirements or other more complicated things, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, and another way to put it too, just for public consumption, is it's, you know, these ranges that are really single dollar, double dollar, triple dollar, but that we would be able to provide the city as an appendix or something like that as part of the report that is the details to it. That's another option we could always talk through as well.
Okay.
So Katie or Kathy, did you guys, I thought I saw one more hand, no?
I had mine up from before
Yeah.
and I took it down.
Oh, gotcha.
I already added my comment to that, so.
Excellent. Well, that if we're okay with it, and let's keep these discussions going. I love the engagement so far of everybody. I want to make sure we continue to do this. I'm not going to walk through every single page, but I just wanted to point out some highlights of the document. Starts through like with an overview, right? And as we kind of get through in the table of contents, we broke this up into essentially 5 chapters. We first talk about the existing conditions. We work into the planning process, talk about the vision and goals, and the recommendations piece. And all of these have different levels, kind of walking it through. Just on a real high level, I think chapter 4 is where we get into the vision and goals on page 29. And Steph, if I could put you on the spot, maybe about just saying a few words about this process as we broke in from the vision and, you know, the bucketing and the key themes that were developed, and then kind of talking through our themes and carrying those forward into our recommendations and finally our goals. That'd be amazing.
For sure. Yeah. Happy to jump in here. So really the origin of where the information in section 4 is coming from is really from the engagement that we heard through the survey and, you know, the in-person engagement things, the walking tour that you all participated in as well. Really, our goal there was to understand how are people currently using University Avenue? What are the issues and opportunities that they see? And then what does that then mean for what they want to see out of this corridor? And so I think you guys had a meeting working through those survey results. You saw those components. And really, as we were looking through them, there were 4 main components that came out of it, aside from the fact that University Avenue does a great job in its current condition of moving people through the corridor. Right? I don't think anybody would disagree that that is the core function that University Avenue does, which is great. It needs to still do that for some capacities, but there are some other areas where it's deficient, and we have some opportunity for growth and kind of change to turn University Avenue into who we want it to be as a community. And so those 4 buckets really fell into multimodal movement in terms of thinking about how other modes aside from our driving in cars use the corridor, thinking about the development along the corridor and from both a residential and retail opportunity, thinking about the aesthetics and sense of place or the public realm of the corridor, what happens between the curb line and the property line in terms of that space there. And then also making sure that, yes, the corridor is really great at moving people through the project area, but also we want to make sure that people can efficiently get to the destinations along the corridor as well. So that led us to really establishing, instead of one, oh, can you go back?
Oh, I'm sorry, Steph.
It's okay. Instead of creating one vision statement that says University Avenue will do all of these things, this vision that we created and which has been up on the website really creates some sub-vision statements that really focus on those 4 buckets. And this hasn't changed other than the colors switched a little bit from what was up in December, just to match the rest of the document. But we really felt that these 4 buckets did a great job of explaining what our focus areas needed to be for the rest of the plan. And that's really how we organized the plan as well. So go ahead and go to the next page there, Paul. So really the 4 buckets of those vision elements that we really laid out end up being safe multimodal movement, opportunities for redevelopment, a vibrant public realm. Again, what is that space in between the curb line and the property line, and then efficient access, making sure people can get to those destinations along the way. So I won't go deep into here, but this talks about where we came up with these key themes, what was said in engagement that, identified that these things were where we wanted to be putting our focus in terms of the vision for University Avenue. If you can go ahead to Paul. Next
Yeah,
page.
just real quick, just wanted to add a comment in there. So this encapsulated like 95% of the comments, that were brought in, and some of there's other comments and other pieces that we considered that might not necessarily fall into one of the 4 buckets. I think about we still want that to connect the transit, the BRT and things like that. But we might not be able to map that, for instance, or we might not be able to put a specific location on these. All of these particular things also are things that are going to be show up later in the document as mapped locations as well. So.
And yeah, just to maybe add on that accord, the intent is that these are some broad enough buckets. So multimodal, though the image there shows someone walking in a bike, multimodal also includes transit and some of those other modes as well. So the intent is for these to be broad enough that you'll have some flexibility when it comes to implementation. Maybe it wasn't an issue when we were doing this study, but in driverless vehicles has become a thing in 2023, and now you maybe have some flexibility in terms of what our goals are here. In terms of being able to use it with the changes that might happen in the community. So yeah, moving forward, we've established goals then for the overall process and helping us achieve that vision. I won't go through all of these specifically, but we did kind of group them in some common buckets in terms of our, transportation, how we're moving, some general planning themes and land use, and really wanted to make sure and highlight that these goals fit into and help us achieve the vision for those different buckets. So that's how things are organized here in our goals section.
Yeah.
So I think that
that's perfect. And I think, just overall thoughts on that. I mean, like Steph had mentioned, as we get into the recommendations here, we wanted to make sure that, those 4 buckets are easily digestible by the reader as well. And so we map everything. But then, some people want to see it. That's going to be the one map that they go to. It does get admittedly a little bit hard to follow. And so then we kind of taken it out and just provided individual maps specific to each of those 4 buckets in our recommendation section as well. So just I'll kind of take off here from the recommendation section here on page 34. They're shown graphically. Again, we developed specific areas to map under each of these with a number corresponding to kind of go with the color and the comment. All right. And so what that looks like is a busy map that has just one word one-word definitions of kind of reminders of what they are, right? So these are different upgrades, they're different sightline issues or access issues, everything on the corridor mapped in this one-stop location. And then we understand that, you know, after taking a look at that, that gets a little bit busy. And so we decided to kind of take it and break each of the elements out specifically by their color. And then each of the recommendations corresponding to the number is listed in the recommendations below. So again, I think it's worth mentioning, like, the sky is the limit for recommendations. We can get very specific here, or we can keep them very high level. And this is where we need staff. We have differing needs for this plan, right? We have the council who wants that blueprint to move forward. We have the resident that just want to know, you know, what am I doing? Where are the issues? What are the investments? And then, you know, as Abby mentioned, the staff might be using this to prioritize and to budget and things of that nature. So we wanted to be specific. And the way we present each of these is just in a one-pager, just a simple one-page graphic that has a lot of information on it. It touches on like the background of why we're doing something or what the issue is, where they are on the corridor, and these can have like different spots on the corridor might have different priority levels based on traffic patterns or usability need, obstructions or whatever they would be, a general cost estimate. And again, that's described here on page 36. When we use the cost estimating buckets, we dumped them into 50,000 or less, 50 to 100K or over 100K. Is that appropriate? Do we need more? Do we want to be really specific? Certainly up for discussion here. And then we wanted to get a description of the detail, like what's happening, where could it be happening, what might it look like, provide some resources down here for you guys to understand and for everybody to incorporate. So as their manuals, best practices, things that we can be using, again, just at a bullet point level, not getting so descriptive, but if I want to find information, here's where it could be useful. And then again, just obviously funding is a big issue. And so forward thinking on that, and we might be able to capitalize on various grant programs, you know, just to be aware of those and things that could help support pushing projects forward as we move through. So again, that's a lot to take in. I'll just pause again, see if there's anybody that has any comments so far.
Paul?
Yeah.
How did you determine the priority level? Was that something that came out of public input, or how did that come about?
Yeah, the priority level was just our guess, our guide as to how we saw things within each bucket, right? So like if you're talking about crossing signalized intersections, these three streets might be the higher priority over Branch or Bristol, right? When it comes down to it. So we're not comparing signalized intersection upgrades versus mid-block, as you better do all the signalized ones first or all the mid-block second or anything to that nature. They're compared within to each other, if you will. And Steph, there might be other areas where that's not the case. I can't think of any, but where we overall just said, this is just high priority, just based on feedback from the survey, from the community corridor understanding that we have from discussion with staff. Anything to add on that?
Yep. Yeah, I think the public input that was received was definitely a component of this in terms of how we defined priority. A big piece is some of these are linked to other things as well. And so if there are elements that require something else to happen first, they are going to be a lower priority, just because, you know, we can't have something, you know, too many high priority things that are connected to each other in some of those things. I will note too, with that unknown component, sometimes that was used because there are maybe many external factors at play that we can't necessarily say what the priority or the cost might be to that component of things. Or it might just be that we saw a need to maybe take a look at, I'm trying to look at one that has unknown. From the exploring street lighting options, there's a few different ways of looking at that recommendation, for example, in terms of whether that is, just upgrading from a sustainability standpoint in terms of corridor lighting, but then there is also the component of developing, a lighting standard, in terms of the actual facility or pole that's used throughout the corridor. And some of those things are a little unknown of how much investment the city wants to do. And so that's where we left those as unknown.
Thank you.
So I guess another, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. What are hardened center lines?
A treatment, Abby. There's different, there's different treatments that can be used that basically kind of act as a barrier that you can drive over, but that you can get around. That just kind of deters traffic from being from going into that area. It's better than a painted line, but it's a little bit more than a curb, or not quite a curb, I guess would be the.
Okay, I've never heard of that before, and I was just reading it on the slide about the crossing upgrades. And
yeah,
I was like, oh, that I don't know what it is, but if it would help with left turning speeds being lowered, that seems like something we might want to look into, because we have a lot of problems that even the intersections that do have leading pedestrian intervals, we have a lot of problems with left turning vehicles not seeing
right.
pedestrians.
Yeah, Park Street, maybe making a left from Park, from Tabby and Jack's out towards, the residential corridor could be a location there where it might be a good idea just to widen that radius and give the driver a little bit more time so an incident doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But these are, a lot. One thing you will notice with these is they're different states of completeness to some of these. Like when it gets into public art, there's a lot of different options. Daphne and I discussed some of the horse statues, right, that are happening on like the Stone Horse area. And, is there a desire for the city to take on some of the branding, some of the community-wide type stuff where it's in various parts of the community? Maybe it's at the edges, maybe it's at Allen, and maybe it's at Branch, and maybe it's at Parmenter, where it just kind of is this corridor identifier. But we didn't want to go too far with some of those. We could easily fill those in, but we also wanted some input on a few of these items. So as you go through this, you'll see like number 1 here, it's pretty complete. It's ready to go. It's fully developed. And then as you get into some of these others, it's not just because we got lazy or we did, we truthfully wanted to get your thoughts and opinions in on how to do this. What do we even want to bring this up at number 1? And then just to what level you want to pursue or kind of pivot us a little bit based on obviously all these other committees and meetings and things like that's happening community wide. So.
Abby, what other committees do you think are going to view this?
I was just wondering about that too. Like you mentioned the public art, and I staff the city's public arts committee, and if it were just up to me, we would talk about wanting public art at every single major entrance to the city and along corridors. And we have a spine of public art that's been identified in the city's public art master plan along Parmenter Street. But obviously it's not just up to me, and I don't think that that's the focus of this plan. From what I'm seeing in the recommendations, many, if not most of them, are related to crossings, streetscaping, multi-use paths. And I think that right now, the way that the document reads, those are kind of the focus areas. And so from what I'm seeing, I think that the Pedestrian Bicycle Transit Committee should take a look. And I also think the Public Works Committee should be involved.
Abby, that's a really good point. And Randy, thanks for bringing that up too. I think one of the things I was thinking about through this whole effort, it was like, there's a lot of parallel efforts going on, right? We know your zoning code rewrite projects happening. I think when we first talked about it, we understand infill and redevelopment is a huge issue. We understand that, uniform setback locations and street, some of those things, and parking lot circulation even, needs to be considered. But then again, trying to incorporate those, we put less of an emphasis on those and just kind of, making reference to your zoning code rewrite project when complete will give you the ordinance or the guidance to maybe for the uniform setback distances. So there's varying plans that are also considered as part of these. And, there's never a place, there's never a time when everything's just done and you can just write. It's always ongoing and evolving. So again, transit's one of them. One of the things that we know on the corridor that we want this corridor to be is more walkable and more desirable and reduce the amount of trips. As the corridor intensifies or redevelops, we want to certainly utilize that. But with the latest BRT and the route selection, we might have to put that not in a specific mapping element, but like as just an overall recommendation or a path to consider and routinely monitor, if you will. So it was a fun challenge, and it still continues to be. Just digging in and providing some recommendations without really knowing what level do we at this point want to be pulling those down to, who's going to be the intended audience, what boards and committees might be looking at this and interested in providing input as well. And then, just from this group, the content, is it appropriate? Do we have enough? Did we go too far, too little in a lot of these areas? Are there glaring things that we missed and things that we need to make sure that this plan needs to have? I want to know that. And this plan has to have something in it for everyone. I think that's been our thought right from the beginning is, if you wanted to just go up there and get real specific, there's probably an opportunity or an area to do that. However, if you just want to thumb through it and look through, some of the overall recommendations and say, oh my gosh, yeah, it would be cool to put a multi-use path in around on Branch Street and connecting into Allen. That would be awesome. It's possible. Do you want to do it? There's a lot of hoops to jump through with, business owners and right away, does it all fit? Does it all work? A lot of study still needs to do, for a couple of these things as well.
I would like to see some, I like the way the recommendations are based on the various themes, but I would also like to see something where they are based on priority and being able to be done in a reasonable period of time. I think so, if some people may look at this and say, okay, you're giving a high priority to the crossings, but you're giving a low priority to this path between Allen and Branch. And maybe to explain in more detail why that is a low priority because of everything else that has to be done. But maybe if something was presented in the way of, okay, here are some things that could be done in the near future, meaning maybe in the next few years, and this is what the cost might be. And that I think is very much in the area of the crossings, that a lot could be done with that in the relatively near future. And I think that it would help to sell the plan if people would see that, okay, yes, there are some real solid recommendations here that would make it safer in the University Avenue corridor, versus seeing something with a path that may not be able to occur for another 20 to 30 years.
Great points. Thanks, Jim, for those comments, and all are very truthful. I think without, shoving something down the city's throat for us, the first step is to put the recommendations out and then just kind of say, we need your help. We need your help as residents, as committee members, and as staff to help us prioritize, right? We have to understand that even if the path is our number one priority, that's years away, right? And so we have to tell that story, articulate it. And I love your idea. I think it's worth saying that it's, based on all the, maybe it's just another subsection of this one is like, here are all the recommendations mapped. And then it's just an add-on that basically says, now here they are prioritized. And here's the money, the real dollars that may go into that. And again, as Abby mentioned, as the city puts together yearly budgets or, incorporates into long-range plans, short, medium, and long-term goals is always something that we wanted to put forward. But this being visionary document, right? It doesn't, I think there's, to be 100% truthful, I think there's 3 studies that could come out of just this study right here. There's a lot of effort that goes into calculating costs, into developing, the engineering pieces that go along with, accurate cost estimates and things like that. We took the approach of kind of keeping it a little bit more visionary, but we can certainly dive in deeper on the next page, the next step too. But
Paul, if I could just add an idea, as Jim was going through things, I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to conclude the recommendation section with highlighting considerations for implementation. So the one thing is we were very careful to make sure that we weren't pigeonholing the city into doing something within a certain time or committing you to something that you might not be able to do for whatever reason. But I wonder if I think there's an opportunity to talk about what the priority is and what that means in the grander scheme of things across each of the recommendations. We could be highlighting who some of these partners might be, whether that's within the city or regionally. So I'll take public art again, that the Public Arts Commission should really be a leading charge of something, of that implementation, things like that. I just wonder if that's a way for us to provide a little bit more detail, and then it allows us to bring all of the recommendations back into one big consideration. So just throwing that out there as a concept.
I like that. So almost assigning, right, kind of the next step, committee or people or persons to kind of move it forward once we get down there. Yeah, like that. All right, I don't know, is Randy or Kathy?
Go ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, I don't want to get in too much detail, but I do have some questions on the priorities of one is the signalized in the intersection of Bristol Street as low. Is that because it's already signalized and it's already a good crossing spot? And then I wanted to ask about the Park Lawn Place. The just recommended detail is confusing to me, as it says installation of a new crosswalk at Park Lawn Place eliminates a pedestrian crossing at a busy intersection. I don't know what that means to install. What is it eliminating?
Gotcha.
And how is busy location determined? Do we know how busy that is?
Yeah, great question. So again, it's not like there's pedestrian, in order to do this in the right way would be, in order to prioritize these, it would be like, hey, pedestrian counts are needed here to understand, or bicycle and pedestrian counts are going to be needed here to really understand that baseline, right? That spot at the beginning. I think what I was referring to when we were talking about Park Lawn in itself is, the school is over here. They need to travel, to use this crosswalk, they need to go down and follow this red line to hit this path. And they don't need to cross, 3 different times. They can just cross once. And that's where I was talking about it eliminating. It's better aligned with the path and on the same side of the school. And so what people are just going to do, the students are just going to take the path of least resistance, and they're not going to choose to use the crosswalk. So this particular one, that's what I was referring to.
Okay, that's very tiny in the photo, so
Yeah, I know.
but when you explain it like that, it does make a lot of sense. And then the question was, what you would need to do a study to find out how busy the intersection is. So this is just kind of a assumption then, it's a busy intersection?
It would be our first brush, you know, about who's using the crosswalks based on observation, where schools, you know, might be, if there's an existing infrastructure in place. You mentioned the signal at Bristol.
Right.
You know, and so maybe, you know, in these two situations, we would prioritize it, you know, this one over that one, or that one over this one. Some of these other, you know, mid-block crossings or things like that, that are down the corridor that have, you know, we looked at crosswalk spacing, we looked at probably, you know, the use, you're not connecting houses to houses, you're connecting businesses to businesses, and it's a driving destination. That might have factored into it as well.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Randy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you brought up the fact that you know, there's more inputs that are necessary here to kind of get further on some of the items, and you mentioned the zoning code rewrite and how this might dovetail into the zoning code rewrite. And I think that's a really interesting question. I was, you know, I was hoping to see, honestly, I was hoping to see this would maybe have some more, you know, design guidelines and development standards, and, you know, maybe some more on land use and housing options, you know, where parking goes, all that kind of stuff. But I understand now kind of how you arrived at where you're at. And I'm wondering if, you know, how we could maybe make more progress on those items. Or are we, Abby, are we going to leave that up to the zoning code? It seems to me like, at least in my head, I kind of thought, well, the zoning code will stand on its own, and then this will be a more detailed look at the corridor itself and how we want the corridor to work.
Yeah, that was my thought also, Randy. To give one concrete example, on the Parmenter Street corridor, we have enhanced design guidelines that I don't think we can impose on properties as they redevelop. I'm not sure that the city has the ability to impose some of those criteria, but generally, because they are written into the plan, when a property redevelops into a new building or there's a major change, they usually will take that advice and follow it, and goes through the design review process with the Plan Commission. Where we have a TIF district, we can absolutely, for any project that's requiring or requesting TIF assistance, we can absolutely make requirements, because TIF is not something that's promised to any new development or anything like that. I assumed that this plan would address site design, location of parking lots, the building setbacks to create a new uniform standard, so that we don't have issues like we're hearing now. Actually, it came up a lot in the public input as well, which is like that brand new building is right up against the sidewalk and the other ones are way far back behind parking, and we can't, what is the vision? You know, what's going to happen as things redevelop? I also thought that we would have more details in there about building design, like facade treatment and massing. Obviously, those wouldn't be requirements that would be on existing buildings or businesses, but as properties change, we can use that opportunity to create a new uniform standard. And on this page that you have up here, page 34, under the opportunities for redevelopment, there is item number 4, which talks about building setbacks, but that's not in the plan document. So it stops on page 48. I think the end of number 3 is page 48, but then there's not a number 4 on there. I do think that that would be helpful to include that information in the plan, because, you know, when we're doing design review, we're just looking at the very most basic standards. you know, do they meet the setbacks? Do they meet the lot coverage? Do they meet our sign requirements? But we don't have anything further that says like the glass on the first floor needs to be translucent so that we can encourage pedestrian activity, because when people are walking, they want to be able to see into a business, you know, just things like that, that get more specific, I think would be helpful.
There was one other section that was discussed, at least in the in your proposal, Paul, about you know, exploring you know, parking strategies, which you know, was just kind of touched on very briefly in this document. I'm wondering if there's some opportunities for us to you know, to expand on that as well.
Yeah, parking's an interesting one. I know that the downtown parking study happened, and I know that we've, you know, got some data for some of the areas. You know, as we started working through this with Derek, and Steph and I were kind of strategizing ways. It's like, well, if a TIA is going to happen, it's going to kind of cover, you know, the site specific things, you know, the setbacks, the distances, and I appreciate your comments on those. But it also will probably look for areas of parking and combining parking. You know, I think one of the things we talked about here is St. Bernard's and the ability to, you know, reutilize parking at Middleton High School. Another one could be at BMO Johnson or BMO Bank, you know, where it could be, you know, after hours could be used for additional parking for restaurants and things like that. So the circulation, I'm going to bring up the, you know, at Willie Street Co-op building there. I think where it gets murky is, you know, they're privately owned already. And so like, how do you make recommendations without, you know, those discussions? But I appreciate your comment. We're open for ideas to how to incorporate that.
Yeah.
It's tough because there's TIAs, I would agree with you. There's, you know, but those things are all considered. But then, you know, for existing situations, we circle an area and go, not good. That isn't really helpful, but yet it's, you know.
My business.
So somehow we got to figure out. I understand. I understand that it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg thing, and but we have to have enough direction, I think, in the plan to help property owners or future redevelopers kind of have a guideline as to what they should be trying to accomplish. And there are many places along the corridor, I think, where you know, perhaps where we would encourage reduced access points and shared parking facilities. You talked about that in the plan, but I don't know if we could get some more detail on that. I know, Jeff, your parking is one of your big items. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, when I was reading this out, if there was a path from Branch to Allen, 25 feet wide, essentially, between the road and my parking lot, I'd be out of business. So, and there's a lot of parking problems all the way down the avenue. And I think we're doing a lot of emphasis on pedestrians and bicycles. You know, maybe up in the residential area of it, that might be true. But 43 years and being on the avenue, we don't have a lot of pedestrians or bicycles. So to give them everything that they want and take away from the businesses, I don't think would be fair at all. And this is about the parking of it. If you look, none of the businesses have enough parking. So unless we can tear down what's behind us and build parking lots, you'd be putting us right out of business. So
Yeah, so
that
Jeff,
is a big concern. Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you,
and
Randy. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
we didn't want to like that's an understanding of a comment that we anticipated we were going to get. Like, hey, that we're not saying because it can physically fit in there, it's going to happen. We have to do many studies, or, you know, even interview, like you said, interview the business owners like yourselves and kind of say, do you want this to become, hey, this business is going to walk into your building with that glass facade and use you, and you're going to increase in traffic because of it? Or is it a business like yours, Jeff, where it's like, no, it won't work with me, and, you know, here's why. And I don't want to make those decisions. I just want to be able to give options for the city to consider that are feasible. And then we can prioritize them or dismiss them in an appropriate way. So it does fit, and just that, you know, that doesn't mean we should do it. And, you know, I think that, just if I could expand on the path comment, as you guys know, the Allen Street on the east side of Allen now is a multi-use path that extends all the way through. So, you know, before that connection was made, working east towards Madison, it would be the next logical connection. It doesn't mean you have to make it. It doesn't mean you have to prioritize pedestrians and bicyclists. It's certainly, we can figure that out. And, you know, that's why we didn't go too far on a lot of these. We just said it fits. A whole lot of study would be needed if it's something the city wants to pursue, including, you know, lots and lots of outreach to neighbors, and understand that.
One of the things that we haven't talked about there was with bicycles and people walking on and on and on. My parking lot is very busy. There's a lot of ingress and egress all day long. If there was a lot of bikes and people walking, there would be a lot more accidents on all of that strip. None of those people watch where they're going or what they're doing, and how they don't get hit is beyond me. So fortunately, there isn't many of them, so it's not a problem. But if we encourage that, that'll make it really tough on us also. So I think down on the residential part of the avenue, you know, build that up, bikes, people walking. I agree with that 100%. Down in the business side, those aren't walking destinations. I mean, that's a driving destination in my mind. So I also have on this middle of the road crosswalks, how do those work in the middle of the road? The reason I ask is we have people that will walk up to the curb, and some cars will stop to let them cross, and some cars won't.
What
It's
they
like
should
Russian
do,
roulette for these old
Yeah.
people.
right?
So we need the crosswalks, absolutely, but there's no rules to them. And that ain't like a crosswalk on Branch Street. And this is 20,000 plus cars going 40 miles an hour. Pretty
Yeah.
good crosswalk.
Well, Jeff, there's to answer that question and take a shot at answering this question. There's two big projects. We're on Allen here, Chalmers Jewelers here to the, you know, as a spot here. Potential redevelopment happening with these two parcels, and the fill bin happening here, right?
Mhm.
Crosswalks are spaced something like a quarter mile apart.
Right.
Okay. Why we would consider a new crosswalk mid-block here is
Yep.
access to transit, and people that get off the buses that live in these apartment buildings are probably just going to run across the road, run for that median block, stand there until it's safe, and then go again.
Mhm.
So, you know, there's guidelines in place for MUTCD guidelines that basically say, consider crosswalks for road volumes of 20,000 or more on street limits that are X amount of miles per hour. And then the guidance basically says best practices would say you need one or you should consider one every X amount of feet, right? And in this area, that area in lockstep with the development that's already happened, I think there's something like 79 units here and 39 units here, plus the existing apartment complexes here. It's more likely that you will have an incident at some point in time for unsafe crossings or just bad, you know, jaywalking. There's no curb cuts right through the middle of this for pedestrian refuge. So a specific incident like that for mid-block, another example is on both of the Mayflower Drive areas by Sports Bowl. Another area, you know, there isn't a signalized intersection. They're just going to shoot across, right? And so that would just be an example. That helps, if that helps.
Jeff, I think you said a mid road crossing, and what I think Paul was talking about was a mid block crossing.
Right.
Something.
So, but what is the factor that makes the cars stop? I mean, it won't be a stoplight. So what would it be to make the cars stop?
Well, so by rule, anytime there's a pedestrian
Well,
is
that's
supposed to,
that.
it's Russian roulette. Like you said, that you might make it, you might have some stop and one lane doesn't, and you're hit, right?
So is it the flashing lights on like Park Street? Is it that type of thing?
It could be a series of here's some examples, right, Jeff? There's like, you could have flashing beacons, you could have sign posted. So, you know, immediately Gammon Road has them all over the place where you click it and the yellow lights come on and then cars stop and they patrol it and they ticket you if you go through it.
Right.
But, you know, a whole bunch of things have to happen for that to be implemented, right? Enforcement, education, people have to be on the same page. And even as a pedestrian, I'm looking out my window right now at Pick and Save here in Middleton, and there's somebody that, you know, is supposed to be having right away that just jumped out into traffic, right? Yeah, I mean, it's like the point is, it really does still have to fall a little bit on the pedestrian to make sure it's safe. I mean, at the end of the day, 20,000 cars are going through it, and until people are enforcement and are educated on what to do, it continues to be a problem.
But to build on that quick, just there are different levels of those mid-block crossings that can be done. The example that Paul has up here essentially functions as a stoplight. It has a red light, which to the driver means slow down. You'll see on the graphic that there are those stop bars, those solid white bars, which is, you know, our indication of where we're supposed to stop as a driver. That's probably the like Cadillac version of a mid-block crossing, because again, it functions like a stoplight, but there are others that are just you know, that yellow flashing beacon, kind of like the reminder when you hit a school zone, hey, you're supposed to slow down, but there isn't as much enforcement from that standpoint. So that's where it becomes a decision when if this was to be implemented, there needs to be some further discussion about what actually wants to be put in terms of infrastructure.
Right. Well, you would need that, you know, stop red light and the bars and the whole thing. Problem if you do a lot of those, though, now you're slowing down the traffic a lot, and it's one of the main arteries.
But you're only doing that, Jeff, when there is someone who signalizes that intersection. So if what you're saying is, if you're saying is true and there's not a lot of pedestrians and bikes in there, we have to balance the cost of implementing something like that versus the safety of the pedestrians, right? And so I'm not taking a position one way or the other on it. Another option here is like, think about Park Street. When you're at that, each of the quadrants are striped, and you push a button and then the countdown is like, well, you might have 26 seconds to wait or whatever it would be. And there's that countdown timer so that the pedestrian or bicyclist knows, okay, in 13 seconds, that light's going to switch from green to yellow to red and I can cross. So there's lots of different options and price points and alternatives. And again, in order to do this in the best possible way, you're right, Jeff, you probably don't want to put in these 7 locations, 7 of this type of thing in there. You might want to pick one of those and then, yeah. So it's, again, this is very challenging, and it's challenging because we have to try to come up with a consensus too, as a group and as a about what the staff wants to do and how they want to move forward and still balance resident concerns and business concerns and all the pieces. So I appreciate all the comments, sir. Great discussion.
I just want to present an alternate way of thinking about some of the things that Jeff was just mentioning.
Yeah.
He's absolutely right that there are not that many bicyclists and pedestrians right now, but I would submit that the reason that there are not is because the street is designated for vehicles, and it's very clear, and there are very few pedestrian amenities, and people don't feel safe walking there. And it is a business district, but if you look at what's happened in the city of Madison, as properties have redeveloped, they have infilled a lot of housing in business district areas and like around the Hilldale area and Whole Foods and Madison Yards. You do see a lot of pedestrians walking there. And of course at the university, and it's still a major corridor that's carrying, 20,000 cars a day. But there are a lot more pedestrian and bicycle amenities there, and it feels a lot safer to walk in that area. And in terms of the really upscale mid-block crossing, which I'm sure our Public Works Department would have something to say about that, but I would also state that I think slowing down traffic is a great thing. And I would think that the businesses would support that too, because it gives people more of a chance to slow down, look around, see what businesses are there along the corridor instead of just racing through from point A to point B. So I think that all that would be very positive for the corridor. I think we should absolutely focus on bike and ped, and that it would help the whole corridor. It may make it safer for vehicles too. Those improvements can be beneficial to everyone using the corridor. And then the only other thing that I wanted to say is that in terms of our TIA process, which I know that our consultants here are more familiar with than anyone, they do our TIAs, but the way that we handle that internally, those are usually done after the GIP or the first stage of the zoning is already completed. So we already know where the building is on the lot, and we already know how many parking stalls there are going to be on the property. That's already pretty well determined, but instead what we're getting out of the TIA, maybe this is something we need to talk about further in terms of our process for approving a project, but what we're really seeking when we get the TIA done is whether there are any impacts to intersections that are associated with that development project. We're not really using it at that point to evaluate the parking or other aspects of the development itself.
Yeah, I would agree, Abby. The TIA is kind of an after the fact thing, and we need something that's gives us a little bit more guidance up front before plans are being developed or as they're being developed, to analyze them and compare them against what our goals are.
Right, and I think a big thing too to consider is consistency between your plans, right? So the last thing we want to be doing is to put something out there as a recommendation because it works in a similar sized community somewhere else, is, and our friends at Vanderwall will be like, wait a minute, and we would do the same thing, right? We would, if they're ahead of the
right
of where we're at, we just have to make sure that our plans are talking to each other, and the timing of these efforts right now make it difficult to get real descriptive and detailed, but doesn't mean it can't happen. It's just the timing right now lends itself to a little bit more generalities than than specific improvements or guidance at this point.
Abby, do you see a way or a reason to get the two consultants kind of together, or the two committees together, or some way of kind of coordinating that? Because I do see that as an issue.
Yeah, I think we could do that. One thing that we also do have now at this point, which I don't think we've shared with Paul and Stephanie, but we do have at least all the land use categories that we're looking at. I can't remember how specific we're getting into dimensional standards at this point, but I wonder if there's maybe something we could send over that would help, and if we needed to have a meeting, we could. But I can promise that the zoning ordinance will not get into design at all. It's not going to say like, we want, this much glass on a building, this type of materials on a building,
right,
signage to be located here, things like that. It won't get into that level.
Well, I mean, will it even talk about parking in front yards versus rear yards or side yards or anything like that?
I would hope so, but I don't know that for certain at this time. Daphne, do you remember if we've talked about that at this point?
I haven't seen anything in the documents that they've sent for zoning.
So
Right
those
now
are
it's-
like, oh, go ahead, Daph.
Oh, well, like right now it's just like, these are the permitted uses and like, you know, it's still pretty general like that.
But I think that that would be a really obvious one that should be included. Randy.
Yeah.
I was just going to add that understanding the district structure that they're looking at would be extremely helpful, because that would allow us to understand how we might need to tailor those recommendations. And if there is anything from a dimensional standard standpoint, that would also help from a solidifying the setback, you know, front yard setbacks. And if there's an averaging component or a recommendation like that, that we would want to put forward here, understanding A, what you have today, and B, what's being recommended. That way if we have that information, we can build from there.
And I agree with you, Abby. I don't think the zoning code that will get into the specifics of design at all. I highly doubt that. So if that's going to happen, it probably needs to happen in this document.
I agree with you, Randy.
Okay. Any other comments? I do want to spend some time on this and just kind of walk through the recommendations that we put out there so far and just understand what we need to, areas to add, areas to take away, areas to put more content into, areas to chop off or, you know, not get so specific. But I also want to leave it open. Your discussion is great here. So is there, I don't want to cut anybody off. Is there any other ideas that have been generated here by the discussion before we walk into specific? Okay. So what I'm hearing is we're clearly not going to be ready to push this document, you know, for a while out to the next. So we'll just scrap the whole scheduled discussion here. And I think what we need to do is kind of not refocus necessarily, but just take another look at and come up with a group. We got to have that outline together about things you want us to look into before we leave today, I hope. So maybe what we can do is just just kind of walking through this and see if it's appropriate for this plan. The multimodal movements. And again, those were the 5 signalized improvements for crossing upgrades. I heard a thumbs up so far. I think on stuff like that, upgrades at the uncontrolled intersections and some options for those. And then again, the mid-block crossings, numbers 1, 2, and 3 on the safe multimodal. I'm thinking those are still good to go.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. The multi-use path on both sides, do we want to leave that data in there and then maybe be a little bit more descriptive? I think we tried just to say that this is an option, but it's really going to be, before we get to the priority of that, it's kind of like throw all the spaghetti noodles against the wall and see what sticks. I'm thinking we want to leave that on there for now, but understanding Jeff's point there, is there ways that we can do parking behind or, you know, being able to do things if we're going to emphasize the corridor to be here, or do we just want to focus on, if it's the north and the south side of the road, do we want to say, hey, you know what, south side might be better? What are your thoughts on that one? Anybody? Leave it?
Is there a way that we could put a recommendation like that is something in a category, if the world was perfect, this is what we would like? I mean, I just don't see that as being, I think it detracts from some of the other recommendations in that it's something that is certainly not going to be practical at this point and may never be practical because of the structure of the neighborhoods and the fact that, University Avenue is going to always remain as a major arterial. So I don't know if there's some other way that we could present things such as that, that it's not grouped in with the other recommendations that are practical to do.
I wonder if we could leave, I mean, my thought is as a long-term goal, I think it's fantastic. As a short-term goal, it's very problematic because there's so many things that have to happen for, for that to work. But if we want to have, a bike ped access lane similar to how it is further east on University Avenue, then we need to get it in a plan document so that people understand that it's coming and that the city can make appropriate plans as we move forward. So I'd like to see it in the plan in some fashion, whether it's one side or both sides. I'm not sure I've thought that through.
And Randy, I think that it's a planned, not even a planned project, right? It's just a visionary project maybe at this point.
Yeah.
And you can kind of just say, hey, it could work. Am I advocating for it one way or another? Absolutely not. Like there would be lots of engineering studies that would need to be, survey has to happen. But here's the deal. If it was something the city really wanted to make happen, there's grants and things that they can go at, TAP grants, Transportation Alternative Program grants, things that you can do to better position where, take away the financial burden of that. And again, those might be 5, 6, 10, 20 years away. But it's something to consider as the corridor redevelops, and you're already seeing some of that. Again, throughout this whole thing, I'm not trying to take a position. I'm just bringing options to the table. This group is here and put together along with city staff and the residents to kind of say, this sticks for us or this doesn't seem to work, take it out. And I'm open to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Randy brought up there, I think, a good point about short-term and long-term. Could we have in the report short-term goals, things that are realistic that could be done, and then long-term visions as part of the recommendation?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's where we're going to. I think you can present your recommendations, Jim, in list format, map format. You can do it in by the 4 visionary buckets. You can do it short-term and long-term by priority or by money. So I mean, that's just different reporting mechanisms to do that. And that wouldn't be a terribly difficult exercise at all. And maybe it's a matrix of some sort where it's everything in one, where you can kind of say, here's where this improvement would be on each of those criteria.
To go with this, in the long-term / short-term, 10 to 20 years, they're saying that you won't own a private car.
And
They will all be, some robot type of car will come and get you, pick you up, take you where you want to go, and then it will leave. So with that in mind, those pathways and stuff would be fantastic.
Right.
And pedestrian and bicycles, they're going to be able to take over because the car, as we know it, will be completely different.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's
not far away. It's right around the corner.
Yep.
Agree. Yeah. Good point. Okay. Kind of we're in an interested time here. We talk about plan for upgrades to sidewalk and terraces. I think that's obvious, so as some of the bigger trees, if they were ever to go away and take away some of the sight lines and things like that, we'd have sidewalks that line and, and then in the areas where redevelopment is occurring, those parcels next to Chalmers Jewelers and things like that, we're making proper upgrades as we move through. That's 5 and 6. I kind of covered both of those at once. Anything else from the multimodal side of things that should be added?
I didn't know whether this was a spot that you could talk about connecting with the BRT or not.
It could. I think so. I think it could be. And again, Randy, to this point, we discussed it. We were just, trying to map each of these locations. We do have a little spot in there that basically says, it's still a goal, but it's not a mappable thing. So I will put that in there as a BRT, we still want to try to get there and leverage our conversations with Madison BRT, and we still want the university to connect up to those resources. Yep. Anything else that comes to mind? Okay, for redevelopment, identify vacant and underutilized parcels. I think we've mapped those pretty well. Worked with Daphne to understand some of the TIF parcels and, you know, plans for those ongoing things. And honestly, we mapped some of the green areas in that map, which were the areas that you're already doing, right? So some of the things that are already happening along the corridor as well, the Philbin, the Kestrel, things like that, we're redeveloping and doing the best we can. TIAs, we talked about TIAs, but maybe it's incorporating creation of small area plans and kind of using staff to help identify where some of these small area plans priority wise should go. And again, we think we know some, but we don't want to put them out there and say, wait a minute, that's my property. Not yours, Jeff, don't worry. But you know, that's the kind of thing we don't want to go too far in. But maybe it's like busy intersections going up and down a block from there and looking at ways not just for redevelopment in that single parcel that abuts university, but some of the parcels extending and connecting to it as well.
Would the small area plan, would your, right now, it's just right now a bullet point, you know, creation of small area plans, but no description of where those were or how,
Right.
what that really means. I wonder if you were just to talk about general locations, maybe that's certain intersections or certain, you know, I would assume that that's kind of where it's at.
We discussed a couple. Daphne gave me a couple of the areas, you know, Brand Street being one of them, kind of in that. But I didn't want to get too specific with it without you guys telling me where the small area plans should be. And maybe the priority of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or we could certainly provide some recommendations again, but and we mapped out some of those areas.
I think that would be fine. The fact that you're talking about them doesn't even make them happen, you know, they'll still have to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And until the plan's prepared and kind of adopted, I don't think it carries much weight anyways.
Okay.
Paul, if
yeah.
I could jump in quick, I do
Yep.
apologize. I have to leave for another meeting here at 2:30, but I was just going to add before I think you get to the point of what else are we missing here and the opportunities for redevelopment. I think there's a fifth bullet that isn't, you know, it's probably a corridor wide specific, you know, in terms of how it gets mapped, but related to some of the conversations we've been having about those development or design standards and those things. I think that is our opportunity, hitting on kind of the points that Randy and Abby have brought up. So just wanted to add that I think that is kind of our opportunity there. And I think, I'm not sure if we have it, but I just wanted to put out the note that understanding the design guidelines, and I missed the exact location that you said that you already have something that gets used. If we could understand that framework. Parmenter. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
My notes were right, but I didn't want to be wrong there. That if understanding also what works out of those design guidelines in terms of how you guys are interacting and what's working well, if we can understand those positives, that way we can build recommendations that are starting to build some consistent methodology for how you're using those design guidelines as a city, so we can build off of what's working well. If there's also some things that aren't working well, maybe we have some recommendations of how you could change process or recommendations to allow those things to function a little bit better. So I'll get off my soapbox here. It was really great conversation, and I look forward to catching up with Paul on how you guys finish up the conversation. So thank you.
Stuff.
Just quickly following up on what Steph had to say there, Paul, and you brought it, you reference it in this draft document. The Madison has a University Avenue corridor plan that has some design guidelines in there that they're a little outdated, but they provide maybe a framework and something that that the development community would at least be familiar with.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think you guys are, as I look through this and get like, start thinking through these, everything we bring up here is one page of work, right? And I mean, it's significant to pull something like this together, but it's not overwhelming, right? And so like the guidelines, like you said, Randy, kind of going back through and developing and seeing what works for the Parmenter Street, incorporating and putting together a street or document, something like this, it isn't overwhelming. So I appreciate, the fact that, oh my gosh, I think design standards on my head explodes, but there's a lot to think about, but there's materials there to reference and best practices to kind of source.
Right.
So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. If you could give me 2 minutes, I think we can get through and most of these setback distances, as Steph talked about, it kind of wraps up orange. When it gets to the public realm, I think we've identified wayfinding signages, especially on your bike routes, Elmwood and Franklin, as needing, and even the cut through path at Park Lawn, just to kind of say, it took me till we walked it to understand that that's a shared driveway and a path through there. And so, I just, maybe there's other things to kind of help people, guide people through and around the corridor. As a high thing, it's always been known east of Park Street, lines, overhead utility lines are there. It'd be great if they got buried. That obviously comes at a decent cost. We talked a little bit about the public art piece, and is there consistency with that? Is there different types of public art that we would want to be, or specific locations? I'm thinking like gateway locations, similar to what Abby brought up. Is there uniformity in art? Is it an open concept? Is there, opportunities for people to compete to get their art on display for 2 or 6 months, or things like that? When it comes down to the trees and plantings, I think, Randy, I think when you and I were walking in July, we were saying, well, it'd be great to have trees right here along this patch where there's terraces and even potentially in the medians. But like, I don't want to be, recommending a specific place for a tree and you say you're covering up my visibility for a business, or, so we have to be careful in what we recommend there. But I think trees and ornamental plantings are definitely something we want to have more of. And then the street lighting piece, and maybe you saw the street lighting document. There's sky's the limit here when it comes to street lighting. Madison just implemented LED lights, energy saving, innovative, comes at a big price tag, but 10 years later you have it paid off. Or do you want to have the decorative luminaires and poles as a sense of place to define the corridor? Maybe it's just the residential area, maybe it's the entire corridor, maybe it's none. But is there anything else that you can think of on the public realm side of things for the blue area?
I can't, but I'm just wondering if we need to give, and maybe that's not obviously on the bullet points, but will we need to have more information on that?
Oh yeah,
within the document?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
you would, and I think what we can do is just kind of saying, yeah, some of these are incomplete. I can remember like 3, 4, and 5 were not terribly specific. Lighting was pretty full, but then we would be, wanting to meet with the city and say, is LED lighting something of a consideration in the future? No, take it out. Or yeah, it is, because Madison just did it and it's working. In 10 years, I'll have it paid off, and we don't have to do the maintenance of it. Those are kind of things that discussions we can have too.
Oh,
Yeah, Abby, yeah.
I don't even think that's a question for Middleton. We've already transferred a lot of our lights to LED, and it's so silly at this point to not do LED because they're so much less costly. So I don't think that's something anybody's going to argue about.
That's great to hear, Abby. That's great to hear, and surprised to me. I wasn't sure if it was something that University Ave was still a county road through that area, so I know it's not anymore. It's been JT'd over, so you don't have to go through that hoop either, and which is really nice. As I was developing that, I'm like, uh-oh. But I did confirm that and was able to find out that that's not the case. So great to hear. So again, the last 4 pieces here, the green section, access recommendations, and I think it's like parking circulation, shared parking agreements. We talked about areas of different land uses at different times of day. For instance, churches and schools. That works really well because you have a big parking lot at a church that isn't used except for, you know, after school activities and Sundays, right? Whereas they might be able to get some parking off the streets for Middleton High School. We talked about the restaurant example at the, you know, where a bank and a bank and, you know, restaurants might have some opportunities at 5 o'clock to kind of share parking and make those agreements without each of them having to have a great big space just for impervious surfaces. We talked about some of the areas over by Simply Swimming, the consolidate, relocating, and eliminating access points there. There's a couple of driveways that are already, you know, barricaded off at this moment. We'll look for opportunities for circulation within so that there's less access points onto University Avenue, as long as the circulation within the sites or shared stayed good.
Paul, would you be able to recommend a distance between access points, just kind of as a goal?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. We can put that in there as well. And again, the improved parking lot circulation really stems off Tabby and Jack's in that area there about, you know, there seems to be opportunities for outlets on all sides of the road, but is the spacing correct? You know, for the right turners that try to access Park Street off of that parking lot need to make a left turn off Park Street on a University. That's problematic at times, and there's pedestrian crossings and weird cycles of lights there. Plus just the in from University Avenue is difficult at that location, supported by some crash data on that location. And then the final recommendation there was access closures for low volume streets, intersections, medians. We didn't take this one very far at all. I think, you know, there's just some treatments that can be used in place to very, very similar to like consolidating, relocating, and eliminating access. So anything else from the access side of things that should be considered? Okay. All right. Well, good. So I'm hearing the next steps now is probably for Daphne and I and Steph and Abby to maybe connect and just get a plan together for, you know, getting some of that documentation in place, the Parmenter guidance, maybe discussing an opportunity to talk with Vanderwall and to understand where those simultaneous plans are to be able to bring this up. We can take more detail and put together single page sheets on the items we just discussed, adding BRT, recommending some areas for small area plans, opportunities for redevelopment, and pushing in those design standards a little further, and then recommendations for access spacing incorporated in there as well as a starting point. Anything else that anybody in the committee thinks we should add or things I missed?
Nothing to do with that, but I would like to add and applaud to all of the city. Look what's happening on the avenue right now. The Sonic is gone, the Jiffy Lube is gone, the Dead Meat Casino is gone. The place is looking a lot better. And I thank all of you very much for, I mean, that's really nice, really nice.
Well, Jeff, we had heard a while back that you called one of our alderwomen and you asked for investment along the University Avenue corridor. So Daphne and I just snapped our fingers and we made it magically happen for you.
Well, you have a lot. I'm impressed.
We got lucky.
It does. I mean, who would ever think a Napa store would look that good? When they,
It is a good looking Napa.
it's good. I mean, I thought a Napa store, oh yuck, but a dead Sonic, it was pretty hard to beat.
Yeah,
And
Daphne did design review for that one. So she's the one to thank. And the plant commission, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daphne.
So for the rest of the committee here, we have some tasks to turn around, and we'll get going on those right away. I think what we would like to do is we'll meet, I'll coordinate offline with Daphne, and we'll come up with a plan to make sure we have all the pieces in place. Maybe sit with staff a little bit and understand priorities a little bit better, and just kind of saying, make sure that everything we've got in there falls within the same priority lining and dollars. We can definitely take that to a different, a more detailed level for budgeting and things like that. And then again, we'll be busy putting on finalizing those recommendation pieces and putting more detail in there now that we have a little bit of buy-in from there, creating a few more pages of that. And then bringing the group back together, or at least allowing you another opportunity to view the document in its completed state. And then, then we can start to talk about messaging and getting it back out for public consumption. Maybe it's next month at this point.
Yeah.
Does that sound good? Does anybody have any last questions before we call it a day and go out to single digit weather again?
Thanks for your work. It's
Yes.
great progress.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you,
Thanks, you
Paul.
guys.
You've
Thank
done a
you.
great job.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
Yep.
All right, we'll be in touch. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.